You're listening to ADHD Support Talk. ADHD Support Talk is brought to you by addclasses.com. Visit www.addclasses.com for helpful online events and resources today. I am Lynne Edris, so welcome back to ADHD Support Talk. I am a productivity and ADHD coach. I help overwhelmed professionals reduce procrastination, improve time management, and get more done with less effort so that they have more time and energy for the things that matter most to them. So I am a woman with ADHD myself, guys, so I get it. I've been there, I've done that. So I understand the struggle, and I am here to help you learn to come out the other side. So I want you to share the same success that I have shared. I want you to be able to live a life of the success and fulfillment that is possible for you. So you can learn more about me and what I do and the programs and services I offer at www.coachingadvantages.com. But today I have Bonnie Mincu with me, and we're going to talk about a really important topic for adults with ADHD, and that is communication and communication breakdowns. So welcome, Bonnie, or welcome
Thank
back, I
you.
guess I should say.
Thank you. It is great to be here again.
It's great to have you here. So tell our listeners a little bit about you, what you do, where they can learn more about what you do, all that good stuff.
Okay, well, I'm an ADHD coach. I'm one of the older ones, I guess. I started ADHD coaching in 2001 with thrivewithadd.com. And I had a 23-year corporate career before then. I was an executive and business coach, an organization development consultant, which is dealing with the human side of organizations, and I was a training manager. And I left corporate thinking I was going to do all that on my own instead of having to go through the big consulting firm that I worked for at the time, and got nothing done on my own at all, and found out to my great surprise that I had ADHD. and so that completely changed the trajectory of my career. I trained to coach people with ADHD in the hopes of figuring out myself. And that is the part of my business that took off. So that's what I've been doing for the last 23 years now. Amazing, as someone who used to change jobs every 3 years. 23 years is amazing to me.
That is amazing. It is
Yes.
amazing. Any business for 23 years is amazing, but for someone with ADHD, that's really amazing.
It's really amazing. Well, I think there's the variety of every coaching client being very different. And also, I've been able to provide a lot of different kinds of training on many ADHD sorts of topics. So, what I'm going to talk about today comes from my background as managing corporate training and teaching corporate leaders and people and teams how to get along and play nice with each other. So, this is about communication styles, communication behavior, things that cause communication breakdowns among people, and the stuff that breaks down in communications in the corporate world or work teams. It's very, very similar to families. It's not
Absolutely.
much different. And so, what I'm going to talk about here can be applied to somebody's personal life, to their boss, just in a general way, to any other person who you communicate with.
Awesome. So this is about relationships and communication.
Any kind of relationships and communication. And it's about, I call this, what does ADHD have to do with it? Not a real lot sometimes, but it's very relevant because I've found people will often blame ADHD, especially, let's say, in a marriage.
Right.
So somebody gets diagnosed with ADHD, and now suddenly both parties are blaming their ADHD on all kinds of communication misses. And sometimes maybe you can say, all right, they have sort of ADHD traits, and that's causing some of this miscommunication, over promising, things like that. But a lot of times I can tell it's simply differing behavior styles, different communication styles, people just not getting each other because they don't realize each of them are giving different meaning to the thing that they're saying to each other.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that can happen in a long-term marriage, believe it or not.
Oh, absolutely. My husband and I
Yeah.
will celebrate 35 years in
Ooh.
about 2 weeks. So yeah, I mean, anybody in any kind of long-term marriage or long-term
Mm.
relationship of any kind, absolutely communication differences and communication challenges can really, really like derail things from time to time.
Mm-hmm.
So what are the biggest challenges you see people with ADHD have when it comes to communication?
Okay, I'm going to say what I don't think are the biggest challenges, which are
Okay.
the stereotypes. ADHD
Okay.
people interrupt all the time. Not all ADHD people interrupt all the time.
True.
But that's the one I think a lot of people are kind of thinking of. The other one people think of a lot is, you're not listening to me because somebody's maybe zoning out.
Right.
But I'm not going to really talk about focus kinds of issues here. So I'm going to talk about different ways that people can sort of misread or misunderstand each other because they just come from
Okay.
a different place. So the
Interesting.
first, so there's a few different levels or ways you can look at it. The first one is, we'll call it personal preferences. And that's one, if anyone's familiar with the Myers-Briggs type
Right.
inventory, MBTI, I take these descriptions really straight from that. And that's where, well, I'll give an example of kind of the first couple I coached actually were classic. They came out different on all four of the MBTI scores. And it was causing so many clashes of them misreading each other. So the woman, as it happened, she needed alone time. She wanted time to just kind of read in the evening. Her husband would get very upset and feel very rejected because he would come home from work and want to talk about his day and want to talk with her. And she was like,
Right.
I need some time to just, read. So he was taking that as a personal rejection when actually he was very extroverted. She was introverted, not even extremely introverted, but somewhat. And his extroversion was sort of off the charts. He wanted
Right.
personal interaction and conversation and talking all the time. So he was really taking it personally when she didn't want to talk with him all the time. And she was taking it personally that he was deliberately trying to ignore her or annoy her rather, and not give her the space she needed.
Yeah.
And that's just one of the personal preferences where people miss each other. Another one is, we'll call it thinking versus feeling default. So some people, their brain automatically goes to sort of intellectualize the situation.
Right.
They call that the thinking. Other people, their brain will automatically go to either their own feelings or what they think another person is feeling in a situation. And they can kind of not get each other sometimes. This is a big one in a corporate setting where you're supposed to be all rational and logical and thinking, but you may have somebody that's always looking out for the feelings of their team or their people, or their own feeling of certain policies might be unfair. And so they might try to discuss those from a point of view of unfairness and just get stonewalled by
Right.
management that's like, we don't care about people's feelings, we're trying to make a profit here.
Right. Exactly.
And it's just two different points of view of how you sort of approach things. Now, both of these styles can learn to appreciate the other's point of view, but their first default reaction is going to be, whatever their own style is.
And
And then
then they
another,
clash. Yeah.
and
Go
then they
ahead.
clash.
Yeah.
And then another big one where people clash. Some people want to keep all their possibilities open-ended as long as possible. And other people really are very comfortable getting closure. They don't like
Right.
keeping things up in the air.
Right.
So this came to pass with me when I went on a vacation with somebody. I am a closure person. I wanted reservations wherever we went. I wanted to know where we were having dinner, where we were staying. And the other person was like, we'll play it by ear, whatever. I don't want to feel hemmed in. What if we don't want to stay there when we get there? What if we... So I think there was one night, I let him have his way, and we ended up sleeping in the car in the mountains because
Ooh.
there was not a single room to be had in that whole part of the Rockies. And it was
Jeez.
August,
Jeez.
high tourist
Oh.
season in August. Yeah.
Ah.
But that was one where, you know,
Yeah.
there's not a lot of
Total
compromise here.
breakdown.
You've got to, yeah, you've got to
Right.
sort of decide you're going to go with one way or the other way.
Absolutely. But if you're not communicating about it, if you're not talking about it, if you're not hearing each other, if you're not making sure you hear each other, then those kinds of breakdowns are going to happen. I was
Yeah.
talking with a client earlier today about we were talking about like the difference between like people who love the spur of the moment
Mhm.
And those of us that just makes us feel off kilter.
Yes.
Right. And
Yeah.
it's pretty much the same thing. So
Yeah.
making sure that you're able to communicate, this is why I feel this way. If this is creating anxiety for you, if the impulsivity or something is unacceptable or it's, causing you discomfort and you don't talk about it, then we end up with resentment. We end up
Mhm.
feeling like our boundaries are getting trampled all over when we haven't been clear about them or shared them, well, or I mean, there are just so many ways that these things can go sideways. And the other
Yeah.
one thing I was thinking
Yeah.
about as you were talking about that, Bonnie, is I am like sort of a verbal processor, but not quite as verbal a processor as some of my
Uh-huh.
clients are, right?
Uh-huh.
My husband is not at all.
Ah,
And
that's
I
one that'll
hear
drive people crazy too.
yeah,
Yeah.
I hear this all the time from clients is they're processing or they're
Mhm.
just sort of talking something through themselves, but the other person hears it as kind of the last word or the decision
Mm.
or
Or
whatever.
the
And
decision.
yes. So
And
it's like that, I
yeah.
remember in the early days of our marriage, I always think back at this example. Like we would go shopping and I would say, "Oh, that sofa would look really nice in our family room." And my husband would be like, "We don't need a new sofa. We don't have the money for a new sofa." And
Right,
I
and you were
and
just
I'm
sort of
just
thinking out
observing.
loud, that's
Right. I was
all.
just observing.
Yeah.
And then,
Yeah.
eventually we got to the point where we'd have arguments over it. And eventually
Right.
we would learn to talk it through. And I'm very clear when I'm saying, I
I'm
will let you
just
know.
thinking out
Yeah.
loud.
Just
Yeah,
thinking out
I
loud.
am
Or
not
just,
saying, "Honey, we need a new sofa."
exactly. Exactly. So and
Well,
he's
yeah.
also like, you know, more able to ask, like, are you saying you want a new sofa or you're just
Yeah,
admiring the
so
one you're
that's the
looking at or whatever it
key.
is.
It's not
Yes.
so important that you're both the same style.
No.
What's important is simply that you recognize that you have this different style, and you can kinda check in with each other and find out why are they saying this? Is it just because that's sort of your preference?
Right.
Or are you really trying to make a point? Which brings up, something I found real interesting, and I just learned about recently when I wanted to present on this topic, and it's the idea that there are, in a way, 2 kinds of cultures communication-wise that forget now the author who named it, but it's ask culture and guess culture.
Hmm.
Ask culture is when people speak very directly. If they have a question or a request, they will ask it. They don't assume the answer will be yes, it might be no. They're just going to put it out there and ask. Guess culture is more things are implied. You almost have to guess what the other person is asking, or are they really asking? And it's considered very rude to ask somebody something if it would put them on the spot, if they would have to say no. So that's kind of assuming the person would hate to say no. And
Interesting.
another way you can look at it is very direct is ask. Indirect is kind of make me guess. You got to
Hmm.
guess what I'm thinking.
Right.
And people that meet other people of the same that were raised the same way don't have a problem communicating. The problem comes when you've got people that were raised in a different way and they're not quite getting what the other person is getting at. And when I say culture, I'm talking about even in the US. I ran into
Right.
this. I was raised in Chicago from a family that was pretty direct. I went to have some surgery many years ago in Minneapolis, which is very Scandinavian at the time,
Hmm.
people from Scandinavia, which is a much more indirect way of talking. And I was recovering from surgery. The nurse complained to my mother that came to see me in the hospital that I was not participating in my recovery. She said, I told her she needs to get up and walk, and she wouldn't. And my mother said that to me, and I said, "No, she didn't tell me I needed to get up and walk. She asked, would I like to take a walk? And I'm in pain." So I said, "No."
She didn't tell me. She asked
She
me.
did.
Yeah.
She asked me. Now,
Right.
a person who was also in guest culture would get it, that that was her way of saying I needed to get up and take a walk.
Right. I'm not sure I'd have clued into that myself either.
Yeah,
But
a lot depends, even what city you were raised in or what
just your
kind of
family
your
communication
family,
style, how
very
you were
much just your
raised, right?
family. Yeah,
And
yeah.
I, I don't know if you ever read the book. This is a little bit OT, but the men are from Mars and women are
Oh,
from Venus,
yes.
right?
Oh, yes,
There
yes.
are often like just style differences, right? Whether it's
Yeah,
men
even
or
between
women
men and
or
women, yeah.
between women and men and men. I mean, these are communication styles, communication
Yeah,
differences. And if you are expecting the other person to read your mind or
that's it. The guest culture
yeah,
expects a person to
yeah,
read your mind.
yeah. And
The
I
ass
think,
culture just says it.
I have three sisters and
Mm,
growing up in a family full of women, there's a lot of guest culture, but I
mm,
tend to be more of the just say what you
yes.
mean what you
Uh-huh,
say
uh-huh.
type.
Yeah.
And but I see that a lot with like friends and people that I've known over the years. Like,
Mhm.
how is he supposed to know? Or how is that other person supposed to know that they hurt your feelings or that you didn't like
Right.
that it was said that way? Or,
It's
if you
very
don't say something,
subtle. It's very
very
so I think
subtle.
guest culture is probably more attuned to these subtle little cues
Yes,
somehow.
yes, yes.
That
That's interesting.
yeah. No, I
That's
think it's fascinating. And when I learned about that, I was getting all these aha moments looking back at just different communication times when I wasn't on the same page as someone else
right.
and only realized it later. But those are the kinds of things that, let's say one person is ADHD. Let's say the more direct style person happens to be ADHD. Now they get blamed as, rude.
Right. No, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So a little bit of that, what did you call it? The not the ask
Ask,
or
guess, guess.
guess
Yeah,
or ask.
guess what I'm sort of like
So
guess what I'm
yeah,
thinking.
so a
Yeah.
little bit of the ask culture and maybe a little bit of that, like the verbal impulsivity, right? So
Well,
those two things
that's
together could be really
yes.
difficult for some relationships as well and some communication.
Yes. And that's a whole different other style. No, I learned this in my diversity training as the organization development consultant. So, certain cultures they call them high interactive cultures where people will speak over each other, and that's a
Hmm.
sign of enthusiasm and engagement and not considered rude. Low interactive cultures is you wait till someone finishes speaking before you
Hmm.
speak. Again, Minneapolis was like that.
Yeah, yeah,
Chicago,
absolutely.
not, at least not my part of Chicago. New York, definitely not. So again, this is where the interrupting, where people with ADHD maybe interrupt more than other people if they're afraid they'll forget what they want to say or something like that.
Absolutely.
But they may not always be interrupting for that reason. They might just have come from a high interactive family.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And have that energy around how they communicate.
Hmm.
And that's, I mean, that's a big difference. Try,
Yeah. Now, what's important, I'm going to, I guess, throw this one up from my
yeah, go
corporate
ahead.
days, because one does have to have a relationship with your corporate, your work team, corporate or not. Um, if you're in a work culture where people are not interruptive or maybe introverted and they simply, don't just speak up all the time, and you have no problem speaking up, you may be seen by the others kind of unfairly as dominating meetings, even though that's not
Ah,
your intention at all. And
right.
that's a very unfair label sometimes that extroverts get put on if they're in a culture where everyone else is more introverted or more reserved about just
Absolutely.
speaking up.
That's interesting. So,
Yeah.
how do you see RSD, rejection sensitivity or rejection
Okay.
sensitivity dysphoria,
Sensitivity dysphoria.
figuring
Yes.
into this? Because I see
That
lots of
can,
connections there.
yeah. All right. That one can figure in kind of in a self-fulfilling prophecy way.
Yeah.
So what's happening there, just in general, if someone has that sensitivity to rejection, their brain is almost like always looking for rejection,
Yes.
even though consciously they're not, but something in their brain is always suspicious of rejection, looking for signs of rejection. So let's say there's a communication miss with your partner, or just I don't know, something the way your partner communicates something to you, or anything at all that your partner may do, and you experience that as rejection, you may start talking and reacting as if you were rejected. which
Yes.
is kind of a hostile or passive aggressive, depending on your personality, but
Right.
way of reacting. So now suddenly your partner, who let's say was all innocent and never intended to reject you at all, is wondering, why is she acting like that?
Right.
And if you project enough negativity often enough, that starts to really erode the relationship. And
Yes.
now the partner's being negative back, and it gets to be sort of a tit for tat. Now, the person with the sensitivity may feel very strongly their partner caused it and they
Yeah.
started it, but the
Yeah.
partner doesn't know that
Right. Absolutely.
because they may
Absolutely.
not ever intended to do anything rejecting and didn't even know that what they did was perceived as rejecting. And that can be kind of a difficult thing to deal with, because if a person has that dysphoria, they probably don't know they have dysphoria. They,
Right.
probably believe that genuinely people are mean to them, or, someone's rejecting them. So if you tend to be the silent type, you're not going to get anywhere. You're just going to end up sabotaging the relationship because the
Yes.
other person is not going to know why you're angry. I
Absolutely.
think you
Absolutely.
need to be able to sort of say calmly, I feel like you rejected me when you said that, so that there can be a conversation about it. Maybe sometimes the person really did mean to reject you, but
Absolutely.
a
Are they
lot of
meant to
times
be
maybe not.
critical or right?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
possible. It's possible.
Absolutely.
Well, the other
But
thing,
you can't read each other's minds.
you
Again,
can't
that's
read
very true.
minds. Your mind, if you have dysphoria of any kind, whether it's, body dysphoria of any kind, your mind is fooling you. So you can't always trust what it's telling you.
Absolutely.
You got to kind of
Absolutely.
question it, check in with someone else about it.
And
Yeah,
and
so that one
learn to
can
bring it out into the light, right?
bring it out into the light.
Yeah.
So imagine if you have these differing behavioral or conversational styles with someone that you're in a relationship with, and you're taking what they say wrong, or you're taking it badly, or it's hurting your feelings, and you've got this rejection dysphoria. Yeah, that can really snowball some problems. And so that's where
Absolutely.
ADHD does have something to do with it, because with ADHD, we're more likely to have the emotional rejection than say
Absolutely.
than neurotypical people are.
Right. We're more prone to rumination and perseveration, and
Right.
that's all part of that
Mhm.
RSD that we find ourselves in. So many of us find ourselves in
Mhm.
that pit where it just spins. And, I often
Yeah.
tell my clients, as long as you leave it in your head,
Mm.
it's going to become something that it isn't. So
Yeah,
the
can
thing that you
become an
have to do
elephant in
is
the room. Mhm.
absolutely, or the monster under the bed that's really bunny
Mm.
slippers, or whatever. You have to shine the light of
Yeah.
day on it and get it out of your head so that you can look at it, you can question it, you can challenge it, you can start to change those thought patterns, and stop it
Mhm.
from eroding your relationships and how you feel about yourself, because it
Yeah.
is, any kind of difference in communication style can be really damaging to a relationship if it's not addressed. RSD can be really damaging to the relationship and the person if it's not addressed. So
Mhm.
it really is something we can't just let it be. It's important. Any
Yeah.
other thoughts or anything else you want to share with our listeners?
Oh, I could go on this one forever, but I won't, because we have time limits. There
Darn
is
time
one other
limits.
well, there's one other thing that affects communication, and that's called behavioral styles.
Okay.
And those are the styles that we show to other people. And they can fall into, look at a model, one of those 4-quadrant models,
Right.
based on assertiveness and responsiveness. So some people are very task focused, some people are more people focused. And you may have a task focused person that's very kind of direct and says what's on their mind. You could also have a task focused person that does not say what's on their mind.
Right.
And then for people, the more extroverted, trying to get other people on their side, trying to please other people. And then the less assertive people person that wants to quietly please other people and can't stand conflict and won't verbally disagree, even if in their heart they
Right.
disagree. Lots of communication misses possible there.
All the way around.
All the
Absolutely.
way around. Yeah. Yeah. So it's just so important to, in a way, kind of intellectually understand what can go on in communication and not just give into your feelings about what somebody is saying, because you may be wrong in interpreting what they're saying if they're not on the same wavelength as you are.
Absolutely. In terms of communication style, in terms of their thinking, in terms of their
Mm-hmm.
behavior, all of it, right?
Yeah,
It's just, just because you think it doesn't make it true. It's another thing I tell my
that,
clients all the time.
that's a good
So
one. Yeah,
checking in, right? Checking
yeah.
in, having those conversations, not trying to keep it all inside. It's not easy. Conflict isn't easy, right? Kind of inherent in a lot of communication breakdown is some sort of conflict that needs to be addressed. And that isn't easy for a lot of us,
For a
especially
lot.
those of us who are people
With the,
pleasers.
yeah, that
Yes,
style that's averse to conflict.
right.
On the other hand, there's the ADHD stereotype some people have that
Some of
are
it. Yep.
the bull in the china shop,
Hmm.
completely oblivious to hurting other people's feelings. The opposite of rejection
Right.
sensitivity.
Yep.
They wouldn't even notice if they're being rejected. Imagine you could have a marriage between these two opposite
Absolutely.
types. It probably
Absolutely.
wouldn't
And
last
it's
very long, but
no, but
yeah.
and people are multifaceted, right? There
Yeah.
are a lot of people that come off like a bull in a china shop, and I'm thinking of
Yes.
um I probably shouldn't say this out loud because I think he listens, but my adult son, when he was younger, didn't cue into social signals very well.
Mm-hmm.
But so he would totally miss out on some of the things that seem more obvious, but then there
Mm.
were other ways that he was very empathetic and very
Oh,
sensitive
yeah.
and very connected to people and really felt those things deeply. So I used to
Yeah.
say, he's sensitive like a brick, because on the outside he seemed like a brick, but
Oh,
he's a very sensitive young man. um
yeah. I have a
Always
friend like
was.
that, I think.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
you
it
can't
can be
always, it
both.
isn't, I think most of us are like, some of a lot of different kinds of styles, and they
Yeah.
manifest differently, and of course, sometimes these things can show up situationally in times of stress,
Mhm.
or, you know, things
Especially
also are
behavior
different.
styles.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that come out under stress. So for leadership, for example, it's not a good question, what is the best behavioral style? The best leader is someone who can be a chameleon and kind of show the behavioral style that will relate the most to the person they're talking to. But under
Absolutely.
stress, whatever the real one is probably would come out.
Absolutely. Which
Yeah.
isn't always, the best for the situation.
Mhm.
Very interesting. It really is interesting. So there are some ADHD related factors, but a lot of these are just human factors that we need to take into
Exactly.
consideration in communication. So it
I
isn't
think
always ADHD stuff.
that's the point here. Yeah, it's important to know the difference. So don't always blame ADHD for everything that isn't going right in your relationships.
Absolutely. It may have maybe a factor, may have a role, but
Yeah,
it isn't
yeah.
always.
Mhm.
Awesome. Well, I think this is really interesting. I hope our listeners have found this helpful. Bonnie, can you tell our listeners again where they can learn more about you and what you do?
They can learn more about me at thrivewithadd.com, and they can learn about my ADHD membership program called Productivity Pathfinder at productivitypathfinder.com.
Awesome.
And that's where we get into all kinds of ADHD related training and topics, self-paced lessons, live webinars, live call-in office hours, live hangouts, low monthly membership fee, productivitypathfinder.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us again. I appreciate you being here, Bonnie. I appreciate all of you who are listening. As I always say, I appreciate your attention. Again, visit us at the ADHD Support Talk Facebook community. If you want to connect, if you want to suggest topics or guests, or just share your thoughts, we would love to have you there. If you enjoy the podcast, please give us a 5-star review on iTunes so that other people can find the podcast more easily and get the help that they need and the support that they need as well. So thanks again, Bonnie. Thank you all for listening, and we'll catch you next time on ADHD Support Talk.
Bye-bye.
Bye.